Last week we heard a speech in which it was claimed torture used in the prosecution and interrogation of criminals fails to be effective in retrieving accurate and usable information. And further investigation into this claim shows that might not necessarily be true. And because this has important ramifications for modern warfare today and what our soldiers can and cannot do, I believe it's critically important to find out the effectiveness of torture. And that's what I'm here to say. Torture is an effective tool in modern warfare. I will be responding to 3 claims. 1, torture rarely yields accurate information. 2, torture is useless in the prosecution of criminals. And 3, real power in interrogation comes from intelligence, not dominance and control. And in response to the first claim, that using torture rarely produces reliable information, I'd like to challenge her citing of Douglas A. Johnson, the director of the Center for Victims of Torture, in which she quotes him as saying, "It is a great source of shame for our clients who tell us that they would have said anything their tormentors wanted them to say in order to get the pain to stop, because he is biased in speaking out against torture. He only deals with the horrible aftermaths of survivors of uncountable sufferings. He does not have an objective view on the benefits that torture can provide and the information as it can be applied to benefit the world." And this leads to my claim that torture can produce accurate information. And a current example of this is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who, according to Fox News, Huffington Post, CNN, and Time Magazine, was one of the main planners behind 9/11. And according to Time Magazine, after he was caught and began to cooperate with the CIA, he gave descriptions of about a dozen key al-Qaeda operatives believed to be plotting terrorist attacks on Americans and other Western interests. And in the other articles, it was discovered that he linked al-Qaeda to other terrorist attacks. He was also waterboarded 183 times in March of 2003. So you can see that the application of torture provided some benefit to domestic security, and even he gave some information that led to the capture of Osama bin Laden. And in response to the second claim, that torture is useless in the prosecution of criminals, there really is no controversy here, because that's true. You cannot use information gained in torture in court, but I'd still like to make the claim that there are still times when torture is ethically acceptable. And for my example here, I'm going to pose the same question that Sam Harris, who is a famous neuroscientist and philosopher and contributor to the Huffington Post, posted in an article, which is worse, collateral damage or torture? And so we all know that in Iraq and Afghanistan, we dropped countless of bombs on cities that have killed innocent women and children. In fact, in a statistic according to WikiLeaks, in December 2006, which was the worst month of the war, about 3,800 civilians were killed, roughly equal to the past 7 years of murders in New York City. A total of 1,300 police officers, insurgents, and coalition soldiers were also killed in that month. Now, if we can get more information from known guilty terrorists by torturing them, how many less bombs will we have to drop on innocent women and children? In this case, torture is acceptable because we know the people we are torturing are guilty, and this will help us get more information that we don't have to use on dropping bombs and using brute force and killing innocent people. And in response to the third claim, that real power in interrogation comes from intelligence, not dominance and control, I'd like to challenge her evidence in citing Matthew Alexander, who is an Air Force veteran and uses his experience in the Air Force to explain why his methods, why using his interrogation methods besides torture were more effective. Because in the specific instance outlined in the article, they were dealing with a 12-year-old boy. And it says, quote from the article, "We believe that particularly with a child, interviewing rather than interrogation gets better results." And while that may be true, that using different tactics with a child works better, the average terrorist is actually much older than that. According to the Journal of Economic Perspectives, under the human capacity and productivity of the suicide bomber, the average 9/11 bomber was 24.2 years old, and the average Pakistani terrorist is 21. This is much older than a 12-year-old boy. And the same tactics might not work with someone older as if it was someone younger. So this is not a valid source of times when other tactics are used instead of torture. And since it's already been proven that torture can produce results, I believe this is doesn't really fit with the argument. And which leads to my claim that the threat of torture can provide one benefit to the person doing the torture, and that's to instill fear. In an article from The Guardian, it was quoted that when this intense surveillance is paired with the ever-present threat of torture, the message is clear. You are being watched, your neighbor may be a spy, the government can find out anything about you. If you misstep, you could disappear onto a plane bound for Syria or into the deep, dark hole that is Guantanamo Bay. In times of war, instilling fear into the enemy can be beneficial to remaining competitive in the war and a form of offense against the attack. And another quote from the article, it says, "This is torture's true purpose, to terrorize not only the people in Guantanamo's cages and Syria's isolation cells, but also, more importantly, the broader community that hears about these abuses." So using torture can strike fear into the pool of possible enemies that we're fighting in the war right now, and keep the enemy in line and make it harder for them to do things like recruit members or make it harder for them to gain control over their population. So after relooking at this case, I hope you would agree with me that torture can be an effective tool in modern warfare.
Well, I think that you make an interesting choice, and I'm not sure it's one that helps you consistently, and that is accepting the premise that some of these concepts are in fact or constitute torture, because there's going to be a lot of equivocation on issues, and the interrogation techniques that you referred to that were used with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, for instance, certainly do not rise to the level of, yanking people's fingernails off or, burning their testicles or anything like that. I mean, the notion that this is going to be considered torture, I think there's a good argument to be made here that some of these techniques need to be distinguished from what is traditionally referred to as torture. And the reason I say that is because when you continue to use the phrase torture, it already has a negative connotation with it. I think there's a presupposition on most people's part. Even the word torture suggests something evil and wrong to begin with. And when you sound later on like you're defending torture, even though you might have good reasons that you've explained that there's a value to doing what we're doing, you kind of have stepped in the poop, so to speak, and it's already going to stink because it's got that word associated with it. So I think you might want to be a little bit careful about that to start with. On the first point, when you talk about a lack of results from torture, I do think that you did a good job suggesting that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed gave us a lot of information. I do think you want to give us a source citation on that and be a little bit more particular about the information that's going on there. You just kind of make a passing reference to it, and in fact you're kind of giving the interrogation credit for coming up with Osama bin Laden, and I don't know that that is true or valid. You ought to give us some reason for that. On the second issue, I do think you have the right strategy here, and that is, look, these are not criminal issues that we're talking about. We got to put it in the context of a wartime issue. But then you kind of get into this ethical argument, and that's sort of outside of the realm of the issue of fact that we're talking about here. And even the way you present the ethical argument makes it sound like you are in essence saying, if we could stop killing all the innocent people because we got our way, then that would be a good thing. So, we torturous bastards ought to be able to kill fewer people as a consequence of that. And again, I think you're going to have a hard time selling that to people. I don't know that it works that well. It's a language issue that's going on there. The challenge on the third point I thought was much more effective and clear, suggesting that there's a vast difference between the cases that the advocate's evidence was using and the cases that are more typical that we're going to be investigating, that there are age differences, and there's also a difference in the kind of function. It sounded like you went and looked at the information that was being presented. Was it colonel or captain?
Yeah. This is Matthew Alexander, Air Force veteran.
Oh, Air Force veteran. Okay, so whatever he does as the interrogator, it sounds like you looked at the original, and he's talking about a particular case or set of cases where they're interviewing people